present to you is a huge team effort of many consultants and primarily great contractors and super builders who walk out of sight every day and make these kind of dreams happen accurate. So, at the end of the day, a little consciousness of the idea that Earth matters is all that is important, that we must do every day to our life. So this is from the space understanding of any kind of an experience or an architecture that we do, it's very important that we establish 4 simple planes. That is something primordial to every piece of creativity that we add. But how do you do that? It's not the question of just letting buildings happen just because of the idea of the space, next. But it has to have texture, material, understanding of light, understanding of elements. And sometimes we also sort of radically shift to an idea. This is a large house that we are doing, which is around 35,000 square feet space, which is actually interesting that the person can actually cycle up to the last point of the terrace on top in terms of the edge line. And he can also cycle right from the entrance gate to the 3rd floor or the 4th floor level. And the section sort of allows you to do that. So again, simple elements like that as creative impetus that we start working. It does not have to be, architects are here, it does not have to always mean that you have to draw a plan and then sort of evaluate the idea of how that spaces work, but there are many methods in which we can explore and position. Now, this is one of my most perfect, beautiful, joyous projects that I have experienced building, which is our own studio where around 55 of us work. It's more like a workshop space where we have building material, experiment lab. On the ground floor, we have a large store which also presents architectural products. Then we have on the 5 floors various studio spaces for each person to work in a very comfortable environment. Almost every person gets around 15 feet of table space where he can stack his books and materials and samples and papers and drawings. And added to that, of course, we have an amphitheater where every month we try and host a concert or a lecture event or some sort of a discussion environment. It's that sort of a facade element which is very, very simple in terms of an architectural presence. When I was drawing this, I was inspired by some of the words of Aldo van Eyck when he said that a home or a building is absolutely complete only when the passerby doesn't even notice it. It has to gel so well with the rest of the environment of that context and the urbanity that it sort of weaves more happiness to that space rather than scream and be loud and be expressive of an idea of its presence. So that's the kind of section that you see where the whole building was actually built on 2 heritage structures, which was built before independence. It was 2 houses that we bought. On top of that, without even demolishing the structure, we just had an RCC edge line wall and to reinforce the foundations, and then we put a whole new structure on top. So when we were discussing with the structural consultants, my idea was to build a very light structure in terms of its own dead load. So the whole thing is built out of engineered timber, where a warehouse which was run down in Jogjaya, we pulled down all the timber out of that and made all the walls out of that and created a composite structure for the first time in the country where steel and wood is used as a load-bearing element. You actually montage both of them in a very intelligent way. So one becomes a compressive element, the other uses for tensegrity. And we used just 3.5 to 4 kgs of recycled steel content. And 5 floors of this construction was done in record time of just 6 months. And Reshma was the site engineer who program managed the whole project at that time. And all the floor plates, she's an interior designer and architect, and she helped us to actually monitor every second day what was going on. And all the floor plates are made of timber, so there's no concrete at all. And the final rooftop is made out of precast RCC panels. And very recently, 2 months back, a gentleman who's actually living around 6 blocks away came down to my office and just wanted to congratulate me, saying that when you built your whole building, it's so mammoth, but you actually didn't destroy the street, nor put any debris on the road, nor any building material was ever plugged onto the perimeter. The whole thing is prefabricated element. There is no wet work. There's no mortar, everything is bolted into position and erected. Next, these are the actual pictures of the space. This is the roof profile that you see of the amphitheater, and you can actually see from every floor the other floor, so it's easy to talk to people. You don't need to use intercom facility. You can just scream out and ask them to hand over a drawing or say something, and 60 people can be in this one volume space, and it's very brightly lit. That's the light that streams from the north edge so that the whole office, both the east and the north, is very bright. Ideations that we had done of fenestrations, these are very, very important. Architects use these particular tools and methods to draw, and the more you draw, the more you make conversation rather than actually have, verbatim kind of conversation. It's very important for us to create as many drawings of ideas and graphics and design sort of surge, which helps us to actually understand what the building will be eventually. And it was also responsive to the kind of vegetation that was around. So there was a very large tree, so we sort of built around it. We didn't want to cut the tree nor the branches, so we kind of terraced the whole building to actually hug the spread of the tree, and the tree acts as a great canopy. And wherever the shades of the tree was spectacular, we went ahead and put large panels of glass. Where we didn't have the shading device, we did the double wall insulation of the wooden panels. So these are actually existing walls which was built before independence. We removed the plaster and cleaned up the old original bricks, which was of super high quality, and we could just leave it as exposed rather than hold the lime plaster, and it became another aesthetic connect to the whole space. This is again made out of driftwood. Why you can actually think of doing even architecture and sculpture using recycled materials. These are pieces of wood which float off on the river, and it's reassembled. An artist friend of mine from Vietnam, he made this galloping horse out of it. Again, more workstation spaces, places to go to the mezzanine. You can see the timber floors on top. The red oxide was the original old floor from previous time. That's the, again, 13-year-old lift which was put into reuse. We have shortage of time. So these are spaces where we work out of from. And every material, consciously we said we must walk the talk what we talk, right? So we made sure that every inch of material, every substrate of that material comes from either an industrial waste or it is a recycled element. So that was very important for us. This is another facility which we recently completed the phase 1 part of it. It was an old dilapidated club which was still surviving at the test of time. It's a 134-year-old structure which we pulled back. We completely dismantled the whole roofing system. We included engineers and carpenters from different parts of the country and reassembled to make this whole spectacular space come back to life. In the earlier years, this whole large plaza used to be like a shawl. There used to be 60 or 60 plus sort of boxes, and they were serving different kinds of cuisines, or some of them were doing the same cuisine as what the neighbor was doing. It was a kind of a very erratic mess. Called in and invited us to make a presentation. They were very surprised that we had created so much of open space, because they always seem to have lived, on a more sort of completely habituated kind of an open ground. Started opening up this whole arena and said that we're going to not build spaces, but we're going to design only the largeness of open spaces for a club facility rather than go in for constructed areas. They actually gave me a mandate of around 75 crores for phase 1. And we said that we'll first develop the master plan, clean up the whole ground, and make parcels of land available to build. And we only built 21,000 square feet of new construct. Now, of course, we are building another 35,000 square feet as part of phase 1. And we refurbished this whole old building and recreated the whole courtyard inside to become a large water element, and also becomes very experiential for the people who walk around these corridors. All the doors and windows were again pulled back and reconstructed from the same timber. We only refurbished around 8 or 12 stones are from the 130-year-old marker. So for us, we must try and think as architects that how can we make less debris for the building. Concrete is the most miserable element on the planet. They might be structurally very intelligent and have certain capabilities that you cannot imagine to create anything of what you can do out of such materials, but the quantum of debris that it leaves on the planet is immemorial. So it's very important that we must think through in which kind of architecture and what buildings we can do. Insides of the courtyard, again, we spent a lot of money designing the open spaces rather than the build. These are the verandas, and we had these old Atangudi tiles, and we collaborated again with 3 contractors and recreated the same tile texture pattern and then extended it to the rest of the floors. Theater, events, place. So we converted the whole ballroom into an acoustic room so that you can actually accommodate 180 to 200 people seated and another 50 people on the aisle space seated as a large gathering space. And also it is used constantly by the club for various activities. And it was an original roof of the timber which we pulled down and re-erected back in the same genre. These are the aisle space edge lines. This is the library. This is the President's Lounge. We again wanted to choose furniture from different parts of the world which had connect to the British historicity, the design aspect of it, because it was an originally British club. So to bring back to that luster and connect, it was very important for us to pull all the threads together. So every piece of furniture has a dateline, has a designer idea to it, and the origin of that whole design of that piece of furniture. We invited the designer to make conversations to see where what should be positioned. So it was carefully attention to do that. That's the library. Again, some of these storage units have been there for almost 130 years. We pulled that back together. We added new furniture. We added new extension of book spaces. This is a new cafe, The Baker, which is a large bakery that we added on. And some of the whole interior of this particular space was transformed using JJ bricks. I don't know how many of you guys know about this particular company that manufactures bricks out of Ahmedabad. And today, the extensions of the Buckingham Palace and the Big Ben is being renovated using bricks made out of Gujarat. And these are fabulous quality bricks that this gentleman is doing out of Gujarat. And extensively, we use this particular brick element to create the coffee shops and some of the hospitality areas. That was a spectacular mirror which was actually designed for the Queen, and when we saw that, we were impressed with it. So we kind of added a little more sort of joy elements also. This is a large kitchen. So this is how we transformed the club's requirement of big kitchen spaces. They used to have almost a 20,000 square feet area of kitchen work itself that was happening within the vicinity. So we created a similar kind of a footprint of only a kitchen block, and it becomes a show kitchen where every member in the club can go actually talk to the chef and say, "Thoda tikka kar do." You can change the salt, add a bit of lemon. So you can actually make conversation on every plate of food that you seek and then go back to your table. So this was a new idea which we plugged in, and it's now spectacular. And people are able to go talk to the person and thank him for having done that dish, or tell him not to use lasoon or something like that. It's so possible. I don't eat garlic, so it's very important, and you can actually see what is being cooked on the tawa. So this was one idea that happened, and the whole thing is made like a vessel using copper and steel and black. This is again, if you go back, this is one of the longest single wood tables in Asia. This is a 17-meter long single fallen tree, which is sliced and made into a table. And now, for some reason, the club loves to call it as the biryani table. And this was something that I had picked out of my travels. And it so happened that this was appropriate here. And we had to actually ship it from an island, Borneo, in an open boat. And we got it here because there's no container that can also contain this kind of a scale. So it came on an open, vessel platform, and it was quite exciting that we could manage to do that. Two Indonesians also managed to actually travel with the piece of wood, which was also spectacular. President's Lounge next, and if you notice on the walls of every space, this is again back the large auditorium space. We used little bands of 3D printed panels as inserts, which actually go back to Hakka and Bukka. The Hampi and the Belur Halebeed method of sculpting, giving stories of how people live today. They work on computers, they have meetings, they all dance together, they hold a whiskey glass, or they go to a ballroom and want to do bachata. So all these kind of ideas was actually printed in an old world method and made into little bands, so that 300 years from now, if at all the building is demolished and goes back to earth, somebody is going to find these little pieces back and look at it and say, oh, this is how people lived in 2020. So these kind of little stories also is very important that we must weave back into the kind of architecture we do. And these narratives will actually help connect with the client and make the client tell stories to other people. So now all this has become like a storyboard. So every time the client also shows the club facility to other people or visiting dignitaries, and they all have these stories in their mind, which is beautiful. Again, more visuals of the ballroom. And added to that was the kitchen block, which we don't have visuals. It's a 20,000 square feet, all timber structure, completely made out of timber. It is 17 meters span, and it is possible through traditional Indian carpentry to re-erect that. It's just that we need to go back to our books and learn how we did that, and we can do that. Now I'm jumping into a different scale of project. This is the Nirlon Knowledge Park that we continue to build in Pune. I've been working in Bombay. I've been working with this client since 2002. He's not got bored out of me at all, and he still loves to work with me. He's given us 2 new other projects in Pune to build each around 4 million square feet. This is complete together is 14 million square feet, 140 lakh square feet of constructed area, which was built over a period of 18 years. And some of the sketches that we started doing, this is what I drew in 2001 for the main tower, and then we iterated. mostly the problem with my office is they tell me I don't stop wanting to change what I want to draw, and I keep drawing more and more. And these are the conversations, as I said before, for an architect that is very, very important that he must do with his board and with his drawing board, so that he can actually evolve ideas, make conversations with his drawing, and the drawings will communicate back to him, and that is how you evolve the idea of design, rather than think and say this is my first sketch and that's my final. So these are various kind of articulated elements that we did for the master plan and to create an urbanity. This is one of the parks which I boast completely that even if Bombay gets flooded, there'll be no water in this particular area. We hired Dutch engineers who actually make, dams, and who actually create the whole plumbing and the sanitation and stormwater drain network. So there were 3 Dutch engineers stationed on the site. We imported equipment and elements so that 4 levels of basement and 3 levels of basement are absolutely dry. And this is one of the feats that, of course, the client encouraged us to do that, and we were able to achieve to jump into some ideas of the master plan and how we integrated massing development. Especially when you do a large 27-acre or a 32-acre campus, it's very important that you must analyze figure ground. How does a building actually capture the plinth space of what you want to build, and what must be the open space that it actually encapsulates. So these conversations become very important. And this is the tower that we are building now. JP Morgan has actually bought the whole building, 5 million square feet, one shot, which was the largest real estate transaction ever done in Bombay by one client. That was the master plan. That's the final master plan that we did, and some of the work sections that we did. That is the actual built master plan that we have today. Visuals of what is there at the site from the aerial point of perspective. So these are actual visuals. All this water is coming from the toilets and from the urinals and the wash areas of the whole building. We actually filter it, and there is 1 kilometer long water body that's been created for aeration. And that is the central aspect of the whole landscape. And it was so beautiful, and of course the grass loves that water. Obviously, it has the best nutrition that it needs, and for the plants to grow healthy and be happy. And the client was so impressed with this particular eventual product that he got married on this lawn next to that, water body. And that was a great position of pride. He said, I'm not going to go to any hotel because this lawn and this water body is precious. And this is again recycled content, which we are programming to a very large element of a structure. And it's a spectacular space where people sit around in the afternoons, in the evenings, and while away their evenings, and they have music concerts happening here, which is also fun. That's the lobby space of the tower. It's a 7-volume structure, an aerial view of the point, where we actually build different phases of different scales of buildings to again bring in a multi-cotomous kind of an experience of the architecture of that space, rather than make one tall tower or similar tall-looking buildings in the campus. So you get all the terraces become very interactive and accessible. And each facade, for example, the north facade has a lot of glass, east has less glass, west and south does not have glass. It has only absolute minimal that you want. So the buildings were looking very funny. When we presented to a client, he said, why is your building on all 4 facades looking very different? But then when we showed him the simulation, he was impressed. And today, after running the spaces for 5 years, especially the second tower that we did, his energy meter is looking spectacular as compared to his other buildings, So these parallels become very, very important in terms of how you create insulation and make the elevation of a building. Those are the bridges. This is again the aerial view of that whole water feature. And the new building, for example, the new tower has 7 different shades of terracotta. The whole of the external thermal wall insulation is made out of terracotta, actual clay wall panels which we used for this tower, which is 120 meters tall, and the whole building is cladded with punch windows and terracotta elements. And we told the glazing contractor that we don't want to do a 4-way unitized system and spend 1,800 rupees per square feet. Instead of that, we just did simple punch windows, which actually cost 650 rupees per square feet, but the rest of the wall had the budget for an external paneling, and we used these terracotta wall panels of 4-5 different shades. That's the sections of the plan. Next, how the thermal wall insulation works. It's a very complicated wall that we designed, but it gives us the temperature that we desire, especially during peak summer, showing the aspects of how the louvered elements were done. This is the facade that is coming up as we talk now, the construction that's happening for the 4 million square feet tower. And also within the campus, when I was talking to Kunal, his father actually built this. This was a factory, the Nirlon factory, where Sunil Gavaskar had his first job. It was important for us to keep the historicity back. So the glass tower that you see, the 5-floor glass tower, has this huge wall mural where all the photographs that they have captured of their factory was positioned, and there's an experience museum there. And these were the chillers and the generators and the electrical panel which actually gave energy to the previous factory complex. So we designed the master plan carefully in such a way that the chimney and the old energy block was retained, and now it's a bar and cafe and restaurant which feeds the afternoon sort of cycle of people who want to eat out. And we've not even removed the chimneys, not the exhaust ventilators, and it's a super experience to sit in a kind of a silo, which actually was chiller plant room, and have their lunch and have a bar sort of experience in the evening. And this again becomes like a memorial. So it's important for us to hold that historicity and significance of heritage back into a position to keep memoirs right. That's the walkway line and huge wall ceramic murals that was in. All this is terracotta, completely made out of clay. That's the chimney that we included an artist to create the idea of an azimuth of the earth, and to also give an experience of an ascent, which is again certain jargons that most of these corporate haunches would love to talk about. So it became a symbol of that sort of an experience. Many terraces to include landscape. We actually gave back more earth to the site than we captured the earth. We have almost 24% of coverage, but we've added 68% of more green terraces and green slabs for the project, which actually adds more surface area of ground footprint that you would actually hold back than you build. So it is another spectacular marker that we think we should do for project. The silo, this is the ascending man sculpture, next, which was actually the old chimney. Next. And what is fascinating is the water body have edges of many filters and many block lines and pump lines, so which can be easily serviced and accessible. And actually some of the staff take responsibility of working with that as a part of the workshop area, which is fascinating again for the campus. Reception centers. This is the inside of the restaurant and the cafe, the silos of the chiller plant. That's the present phases of the building. B11, 10 and 9 is what is coming up. It's going to be occupied by JP Morgan. That's how the skin of the wall was done. It was an RCC solid shear wall. The terracotta paneling, next. An additional layer of paneling was done as a secondary walling system. That's how the facade actually looks. It's a very multicolored matrix. It's the diversity of India, I call it. Next. It's a very, very bright orange building. Next. Mr. Modi might like it. Next. So another facility that we did in the same region, Lupin Laboratories, which has been positioned for the third time as the best laboratory practice and architecture award for Asia. And it won also the WAF award for the best landscape and architecture master plan award. The principals and people were working in a campus which was low rise, next. And we wanted to bring in a certain joy of experience for the first 3 levels of laboratory, that they actually sit in landscape and work. So we made an all-glass building, which is a very contrast to most other kind of architecture, but we started working on the landscape. Next. And each of the glazing system was done as a triple layered glass with not only hermetically sealed elements within the 2 sandwich panels of glass, but there is a layer of another airlock before the other panel of the glass was done. The plan was very, very simple. It was built like a cabana pavilion within a huge landscape precinct of almost 6 acres, and the ground footprint was kept as low as, again, 31%, and it was a low-rise structure, and all facades of the glass completely connect to the landscape. So we started actually designing the landscape as a master plan idea first before even doing the building. Next. That's the amphitheater, which is actually annexed to the principal's cabin. He loves to meet his people and discuss with them, have conversations. So we gave him a space where people can gather. And all the perimeter wall panels, what you see as a vertical element, just like what you saw in the studio, is timber, is actually timber. It is a timber, aluminum, steel integrated secondary skin, which acts as a support structure for the whole building as the tertiary column wall line. And that also adds to making of the building, where you use the glazing system as a support structure rather than just as an added on skin to the whole building. Next. These are the landscape that as you arrive into the courtyard. Next, some of the details that we worked. The corridors, which are only for access to service and to go into AHU rooms and some of the solvent stores. It's a very intense laboratory, which actually is working on tuberculosis and on Ebola. Next. That's the landscape that you actually connect with when you sit in an office space or a workspace environment and you see the outdoors. Next. The wooden pavilions, and each are all of them are networked and wired, so people can actually grab their laptops and go and work there. This is the experience from the inside of the workspace area to the outside. This is the boardroom view. You actually feel like you're in a boat. These are the vegetable gardens that we have added on to the perimeters of the dining facility, and they have turns, so people are allowed to bring their own plants, and they have to actually post pictures as to how the plants are growing, how much vegetable they got. They must weigh that in a weigh scale. So this is something that we started discussing with the boss of the company, and he was very excited, and he said, facility manager, you must make this happen here. And they actually get awards now that as a corporate for having grown the maximum amount of urban farming vegetable garden. And this is again spectacular that they won that award twice in the country now. And these are some things that actually architects as us, we must initiate this and educate the client to grow into these possibilities and make it a narrative for them to experience the building, not only as the presence of architecture, but as actually as a functional realm that we can add on. That's the amphitheater, night space, night visual. And we use elements of the structure itself as sculpture. For example, this whole element of walling system became an idea of composition. This staircase, for example, is actually folded plate and a spiral montaged together. It was very, very complicated to actually resolve this geometry. We used Rhino to model this and to actually give exact coordinates as to how to build it, because it was important to match to the curve of the concrete and the element of the folded plate. And what was nice is that eventually the family of the client didn't even want to put any pieces of art in any of these sort of open lobby areas or pantry areas or arrival areas, because each of this structural idea of a staircase itself became a sculptural element, which became experiential to that space. So we did not need any other art to exhibit. That's what you see from the garden. And this is super pride for me. This is a 13.5-meter cantilever. It's like a scissor. It's a staircase which does not have a middle support. It's just held at the back. If you just imagine you open the scissor the other way and hold it up, and that's exactly how the structure works, you know. And Dravid was fantastic to collaborate with us to help us to build this kind of an architectural structure. And this has 4 different materials which come together, and structurally the composition of all 4 materials are taken into account to make this building, this kind of a staircase happen. And this shoots out 13 meters into space, and it's a super sculptural idea. Timber, steel, stone, and Cosentino was used as elements of structural idea. So this is the last project that I want to introduce, which is Wipro Kodati. We are still continuing to build. Just yesterday morning, I presented to Azim Premji his corporate office floor of 3 floors that he's going to occupy, and what they call as the garage, you know, where they actually do workouts, which means they do tests of their softwares, and they do test conversations of their software, and how do the clients interact with their own personals. So they make those experiments happen in the garage. So this whole building is around 1.5 lakh square feet, but this campus is again 7 million square feet built up, 70 lakh square feet of construction, which was built in a record time of 5 years. This is the campus. As again, what we did was we did elevated gardens, and each of these elevated gardens are all bridge connected, so the car will never meet a pedestrian. And we did not remove even 1 ounce of earth from the site. We have 3 basements here, and we almost managed to excavate 21 acres of land. And we put all the 21 acres of that excavated earth back onto a mound and created an artificial hillock. For example, the site was having a slope of around 13 meters, but we recreated the slope and made it into 26 meters in the central gorge. So we have 4 boxes of basement. All that earth that was removed and excavated, we put it back into the central gorge, into the natural virgin soil earth, and increased the layer of that. So there was no debris that moved out of sight, which is again very, very important in most of our project site situations that we always overlook. And this became a spectacular green mountain yard, and all the landscape that you see is similar to access that kind of earth. The building again was built with an idea of a primary, secondary, and a tertiary walling system. There was the primary structure of an RCC wall that was precast and prefabricated and erected. Nothing was done here which was built in situ other than the basement RCC walls. The columns, the beams, the slabs, and the wall elements was all precast and bolted in position, just like the way I showed the first structure, the office that we habituate, but in different material content. And to that, another layer of glass was done. To that, another layer of terracotta skin was done. And each facade again has a different spacing of terracotta. We worked with Rat Labs out from Delhi, who actually simulated using parametric modeling to understand the incidence of light and the ingress, because it's very important that you have to control 8 or 9 parameters. One is air conditioning, daylight into the space, the ultraviolet rays that hits the glass and heats up the space, the incidence of heat ingress that happens through the glazing, and also the wall elements that acts as perimeter, and what does it do to the architecture of the structure. So you have to actually capture these 5 elements, plus there are other elements which add as reflectance of heat ingress that happens from the glass panel itself, because the glass is exposed to sunlight for a long period of time. It becomes like a hot plate and it starts dissipating. So all this was modulated in-house with Rat Labs. So we collaborated and we were able to manage to create this facade. There was an idea of the facade, but the actual calibration of the spacing of each of these elements was carefully connected with the parametric modeling that was done using Rhino, and then erected on site. So it was quite an experience for us that a lot of science and technology of what software engineering can help us to do came to work with us to make this building happen. And again, if you look at the structure, the base elements was done like the band walls of Halebeed and Belur. If you see these horizontal figurines of stone bands that form the podium plinth of a temple line, so we told Mr. Premji that we're going to erect a building which has that classical quality of section but does not have to look classical. So it's a metaphor of, again, how you can be inspired from heritage and architecture to learn from its composition and transform that idea to make a new building happen, which does not have to look anywhere ornate or articulated as the yesteryears of the building, but this is how you connect inspirations. That's the skin of the facade. The whole thing is made out of actual clay, terracotta. The east and the west walls are blanked out completely with louvers and pantries, so there's no ingress of any sun or heat from the east and west. The only wall facades that are open to daylight is north and east. The plan was also designed in such a way to acquire that kind of light elements to the building line. The base structure, next. These are 60 mm thick granite wall panels which was dry clipped to the wall, and water actually goes behind that wall. So this is again a secondary element. Wide staircases and terracotta. These are the restaurants and cafes. The first 3 floors are all games, plazas for food and for people to spend their leisure. These were some of the sketches that originated that idea. The 3D visuals that we presented to the client, and it looks exactly like that. That's the joy. The central courtyards, each of the building has different scales of courtyards, and it's a matrix of courtyards that form the podium plan. You can see the quality of natural light and daylight that comes into the building. This is how, it's actually a 5-hour drawing sequence which is cut short to just a minute. And most of these kind of workshops I do with my team, my collaborators and my associate architects who work with me to make this project happen. This is just a sample of how master plan is done. And this is what I do every day. At least 7 hours or 6 hours I spend drawing, and this gives me the absolute sort of connect to how we must build and what must happen. This is just the master plan bridge connect that we were drawing to what should be done per plan, and it has mostly every idea of the diagram and how they can further develop on. Thank you.